let's close our section on innovation by talking about patents. Okay? So, what's a patent? Well, they're a type of intellectual property right over essentially ideas. I have written here intangible assets that are the result of human inventiveness and creativity. This means that you can't actually patent some things like you can't patent a discovery that is not related to human ideas. If you discover a new species of owl, you can't patent that. All right, what's a patent get you? It gives you the exclusive rights to the economic exploitation of your invention for a period of time. That means that if anyone else tries to use your idea, you have the right to basically sue them for damages in the jurisdiction where your patent is recognized. So if you get a U.S. patent, you're protected in the United States, and anyone else who uses your idea, you can go take them to court. But in Japan, if you don't have a patent, someone else can use your idea freely, and U.S. law does not apply in Japan, so it doesn't matter. Okay? It does not give you the right to use the invention. Okay, that's a different thing, and so you'd have to go through whatever regulatory agency oversees that. So if you have a new drug, you go to the patent office to get the exclusive rights to using it, but you still have to go to the FDA to be able to use it. Okay, the patent would just let you sue anyone else who tried to use it. It wouldn't let you use it yourself. Okay, and this is basically a legal monopoly because if anyone else tries to compete using your idea, you can sue them into oblivion. Okay. It does mean, though, that you have to self-enforce. If somebody else is infringing on your idea, you have to take them to court. You have to be the one to sort of take initiative. There's not like a patent police that's out there checking on what everybody's doing that's going to issue citations if they see anyone doing that. It's up to each party to protect. And that can be a limitation because it means that if you're a small firm and a big firm is infringing on your idea, going to court can be pretty costly. What can you patent? Machines, manufactured products, new types of materials, new processes. The interpretation is pretty broad. In 1980, the Supreme Court said basically anything under the sun that's made by man. All right? But you can't patent anything that is associated with human creativity and invention. For example, abstract ideas. Newton wouldn't have been able to patent his idea for the law of gravity, for example. And then there are three really important criteria that all patents have to meet. It has to be a novel. It's got to be a novel idea. Oops, here we are. Meaning it's new. Okay. It's not something, you're not just copying somebody else. It can't be obvious. It's supposed to be non-obvious. And it's supposed to be useful. Okay? And there are patent examiners that try to basically parse out whether this is true of your thing. They are usually experts in the field that you're trying to patent in. And so they're supposed to be able to tell if this item is obvious or not. For example, if you have a new recipe for beer that has never been done before, you might think it's novel. You can prove that no one has made this kind of beer before. It's useful. People like drinking it. They'll pay money for you. But it might not satisfy non-obviousness because if it's just the ingredients, they all go together, they taste about what you think. Like if you add chocolate to a lager and it tastes like a chocolate lager, well, that's seen as obvious. Okay. If you add a flavor to it that interacts with the existing one in an unexpected way, then that might be non-obvious. Okay. But anyway, so this is the general legal framework for patents. But let's talk about the economic framework for patents. Okay. So I'm going to start a new sheet here. All right. What's the economic argument for patents? Well, suppose we've got some kind of invention that has this kind of demand. This is the market's demand for this invention, and remember, demand can be interpreted as people's willingness to pay for different marginal units. Okay? And we discover a way to produce this at marginal cost C. Okay? What's the value of our discovery to society? Well, it actually depends on how much society can use it. Okay? This is how much everyone is willing to pay for it. But if I charge a really high price, many of those people don't get to use it. What we end up doing is you can think about the maximum value of this idea is basically consumer surplus when it's priced at marginal cost. Okay, and if you did that, then basically this whole area here would be the value of this invention. So for example, let's put some numbers on here. Let's say this is 20. Let's say that's 20 also. Actually, let's make our life easy and say that this is 21. And we're producing this item for 1. Well, then the area, the consumer surplus, is the height 21 minus 1 times 20. But it's a triangle, so we divide by 2. And that's 200. Okay? And that's the consumer surplus from this invention if it was made available at marginal cost, which is the maximum value. But we know that perfect competition sets price equal to marginal cost. And as we've seen in the last video, under perfect competition, no one has an incentive to invent this thing if it costs anything more than $0 to invent. So if it's just laying there on the ground and you can pick it up and start selling it, wonderful. Most of the time, it costs a lot of money. You take an example like a pharmaceutical drug. Some people say it costs $1 billion to invent it. So no one has an incentive to pay a fixed cost to invent. And this is a market failure. Let's call the fixed cost F. And we're going to say the value, sorry, I got ahead of myself. The fixed cost to invent is F. And the value of the consumer surplus is V, which in our last example was 400 or 200. Okay? And basically, if V exceeds F, then we should invent this thing. Society would be better off spending its resources F to have this new product available. Okay? And what a patent does is it provides an incentive to do that. So let's go back to the same diagram, but now let's give this guy a patent over the idea. The patent, we all know what's going to happen. There's the quantity, the cost, marginal revenue looks like this. That's our marginal cost of 1. And we're going to have essentially a monopoly, and the monopolist is going to earn this value here. Okay? That's the profit to the monopolist. In a linear demand like this, that's actually equal to V over 2. You can imagine sticking these triangles together to make a square and it would look the same. It doesn't really need to be V over 2, but that's our example. And so basically we also have consumer surplus. They get this area up here. Consumers still are better off than if the thing had not been invented. They get V over 4. But there's still some deadweight loss down here in this region here. This is a group of consumers who would be willing to pay more than 1 to access this good, but they're not able to do so. And in this case, if F is less than V over 2, the invention happens. Because the monopolist, the patent holder, realizes enough gain that they're willing to do that. Now, you can see that there's an issue here. There's two issues. Whoops. All right. First, we don't have what we call ex post welfare has deadweight loss. So there's an inefficiency, okay? And that's this area of deadweight loss here. We would prefer to be like this if possible, but we know that if we do it that way, we can't actually get anyone to invent the product. So we have to settle, if we're going to use patents, we get the product, we get V, 1/2 value goes to the monopolist, the other V, 1/4 goes to consumers, but we still have some deadweight lost. And basically, let's see. We only realized 3V over 4 out of a possible value, maximum value of V. So we only get 3/4 of the consumer surplus that we could potentially get. The second issue we only get the innovation if F is less than or equal to V over 2, not if F is less than or equal to V. So for inventions where V over 2 is less than the cost of invention, but that's still less than or equal to V, patents provide an insufficient invention, or an insufficient incentive to invent. So for this reason, even if you have a patent system, you still can have the case where there's not as much innovation as there should be. And for that reason, there's an argument for things like other supplements to induce people to innovate. For example, R&D, tax subsidies, public provision of basic research, which would, you'd think, reduce the cost, that entails some of the cost of doing the invention. So we do basic science, and these are kind of the arguments why we have these extra policies around. But, and with economists there's always a but, it's also possible that there can be too much innovation. And to see that, we can go back to the same model here. And we see that a monopolist is going to get this value in here. Okay? But suppose we really, if the invention is for sure going to happen, which is an artificial assumption, but this is the easiest way to show it. If just doing the work guarantees the result, then we really only need one guy to do the invention, okay? So let's say if R&D is guaranteed to succeed, efficiently, we should only have one firm do the invention. But a patent creates a possibility of what's called a patent race. So if two different firms are trying to invent the same thing, they're both spending F to do it, but we don't get anything extra from that extra effort. Okay, and why would two firms both want to spend F? Well, we're kind of running out of space here. Let's see. But essentially, if F is less than the profit that they expect to get divided by 2, then it's worth them taking a shot at it, right? Because you assume that if they're both inventing it and they're the same type of firms, then the patent is only going to get issued to one of them. Whoever's first wins. And so whoever gets lucky to be quickest and file their thing right under the door right before the other one gets the patent, and then they get all this profit. They have a 1/2 chance of winning if they're identical to the other firm, 50-50. And if the cost F is less than 50% of the profits, it's worth doing that. And that means we end up spending 2 times F to get an invention that we only had to spend F to get. And this can happen, like Alexander Graham Bell and Elijah Gray were 2 people who invented the telephone, and they filed the patent for it like within a day of each other. I think it was actually within hours. And Alexander Graham Bell was first, so he got the patent and he became a very rich guy. Okay, and that's just how the patent system works. Tough luck. Another cool thing about the patent system, I don't know if that's cool, but like, let's think about some reasons that the patent, so we've talked about some weaknesses basically. They may not provide enough incentive. They may actually provide too much, but they do have some virtues. One of them is that they direct R&D resources semi-efficiently to their most important things. So consider 2 different product inventions. Now remember, way back at the beginning I said you could think of a product invention as being about demand. So let's consider 2 different products. There's one that looks like this, and there's one that looks like this. Okay, so the main difference between these 2 things is that product 2 has a much bigger potential market. If this thing exists, there's a lot more people who are willing to pay for it, and a lot more people willing to pay a lot more to get it. What's the incentive to invent these things? Well, depends on the cost F, but essentially we can pretty easily see if we get the cost down to the same level, that product 2 is going to be way more profitable, okay? The profit area that you can get from selling, that square is just going to be much larger for product 2. So suppose they're both profitable to invent, they both cost the same F. People are going to put their effort on this one because it's more profitable. So one thing that's nice about the patent system is that it directs effort towards the products that inventors think are going to be most profitable. So it pushes them to try to best satisfy people's demands and try to guess what they are. Okay, so that's one of their strengths. Another strength of the patent system is that it creates a market, or creates the ability to specialize in invention itself. Okay, so suppose you're really clever, you're really good at tinkering with stuff, and you're really curious, and you invent lots of cool stuff, but you're absolutely terrible judge of character. Okay, so you always pick the wrong business partner. You always go easy on people or whatever. With patents, you can focus on what you're good at, which is inventing stuff, and then license the patents to businesses that will then use their idea efficiently. You don't have to be good at both anymore. Okay, so creates an ability to specialize invention, because inventors can license their inventions to businesses. and they don't have to actually run the firm themselves. Okay? The other thing that's nice about patents is that the fact that they're temporary means that we eventually achieve that maximum consumer surplus. Okay? So this is supposed to be the letter W. I'm terrible at writing at this. I thought this was going to be really easy. It's not. All right. Way back when we first started this, we said this is where we want to be. Okay? We want to invent a product. We want to license, or we want it to be priced at marginal cost, and that's going to maximize consumer surplus. The nice thing about patents is they do this trade-off. They do this for 20 years to give somebody a push to invent the good, but consumers, they got to be patient, and after 20 years, this is the outcome. And this works really well, for example, well, there are actually issues, but for many cases, it works pretty well for the pharmaceutical market. Drugs cost a lot of money to develop. Firms make huge profits for a narrow window of time. Not actually 20 years, because remember, you get 20 years as soon as you apply for the patent. And the patent does not grant you the right to sell it. FDA approval can take 10 years too. So that means testing the drug on humans to show that it's safe and efficacious and all that. Okay? So by the time the FDA gives you clearance to sell this thing, you may be down to 10 years left in your patent life. You take those 10 years, you make a lot of money. The pharmaceutical company charges really high prices. But then after that, the patent expires, and the idea is now out there because you had to write it down in a patent. So it disclosed the idea, and generic companies can see how you did it, and they don't have to reinvent the wheel, and they can sell it at much closer to its marginal cost price, and the drug becomes available to everyone. Now, when I say it doesn't necessarily work that way, pharma companies would obviously prefer to be in this situation as long as possible, and so they do a lot of shenanigans and exploit regulatory stuff to try to prevent that. But there is a vibrant generic sector, and most drugs do, like most drugs for which there's a market for it, do eventually go generic. If you think that, if you like this stuff, if you think innovation is pretty interesting, well, I'm happy to talk more about it. I was going to say just take my class, but of course, most of you can't. You're graduating. But anyway, I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. Send me questions, whatever you got, and we'll talk more, or I'll talk at you more next week.